please. Don't pull the iron arrow, she begged. The rancher forced it through. He carried her pain for her. Arizona Territory, near the Dragoons, late summer of 1886. The storm had been building since noon, piling its slate-blue shoulders over the jagged teeth of the mountains, rubbing the light raw until every rock, fence post, and mesquite thorn looked sharpened for judgment. I was riding the San Pedro line, alone as usual, just a sway-back bay, a side-slung Winchester, and the habit of keeping to myself the way a man keeps to prayer when he's too proud to kneel. The wind smelled of iron and wet dust. Thunder walked closer on stiff legs. I wanted a gate mended and a hinge fixed in the little line shack by the cottonwoods before the first hard rain. That was the small, honest plan of an old hand with not much left to plan. The scream came thin through the weather, a ribbon torn down to the last thread. Not the high sound children make, not the wild edge of a cougar either. A woman, human and close. I reined the bay and felt him set his feet like a mule that knows a bad road. The second cry didn't rise so high. It bled out in the middle and lay there, shaking the air without sound, the way a man's breath shakes after a bullet takes the wind from him. I was 40 yards off the shack when I saw the door yaw, banging once, twice, like a mouth trying to speak around broken teeth. If you enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button right away. And if you don't, then just hit the like button anyway to keep more Wild West love stories coming. I dismounted with the slow care a brittle-boned man uses when the weather is turning. The shack was no more than 4 walls of split pine and a roof that had survived other tempers of heaven. The hearth was live, stew left to whisper to itself, spoon half out of the pot like a hand reaching for help. A chair lay on its back as if it had been struck by lightning. On the packed earth floor, near the rough table, a woman knelt with both palms, splayed as if to anchor the whole world from running off without her. An arrow pinned her like some cruel exhibit feathered end, trembling with every breath she managed. The iron head thrust out the front below her collarbone, black with blood at the edges where the light went thin. She did not raise her face when I stepped in, but her voice came low and steady, a voice that knew pain and had long ago learned to meet it standing. "Don't pull it," she said. "Don't you pull it. Late." "I won't," I told her, though part of me, the quick, foolish part that wants to save what a man can't, had already measured the shaft with my eyes. "My name's Elias Cade. I came for hinges and found more than iron could fix." She lifted her head then. Her hair was heavy and unbound, gone loose across one shoulder in waves that caught the hearth glow. Her eyes were dark cedar pools, but there was a steadiness in them that put my own to shame. "Ayana," she said, fighting the breath for each syllable. "Nantan, from the Chiricahua." The words were not an apology. They were a stake in the ground. I nodded once. Thunder laid a slow hand across the roof. "All right, Ayana Nantan," I said. "We'll do this right." The arrow had entered high from behind, at a downward cant. Whoever shot it stood above her on the porch roof, or the cottonwood brace beam outside. Or perhaps she bent to lift something when the shot was loosed. I could hear the wet catch in her lungs, and counted beats like a man at a graveside. Not many to spare, but some. "Don't." She shook her head, more a tremor than emotion. "They'll come back. 6, maybe more." Her hand slid along the table edge until her fingers found a torn scrap of cloth. She pressed it to her lips, and when she pulled it away, there were rust-brown freckles blooming on the weave. "They took my uncle, said debts, said the land was pledged." The way she spoke that last word made me taste tin. "Debts," I said, and the letters fell like horseshoes onto hardpan. I'd heard the tune mining men, papermen, men who carried their law in their saddlebag with a seal and string. "Do they have a name?" "Silas Callow." She closed her eyes long enough to steady herself. "Rides with men who laugh when they hurt and laugh again when it stops. I know the kind." I put my hat on the peg and set my Colt on the table where I could take it up blind if need be. "Here's what we're going to do. We don't touch that iron. We brace you up so the shaft doesn't waggle, and write your name deeper where it has no right to. We set a plan that keeps breath in you and keeps men in the doorway honest." I spoke like I had the world in both hands. The truth was I had thunder, old sins, and a woman I had never met asking me to hold steady. I eased a folded blanket under her knees, another under her forearms. On my say, "We'll lift you an inch to settle the shaft," I said. She nodded once. I slid my left hand to the wood, to feel the vibration of her breathing run into the grain. On 3, I raised her enough that the feathers stopped that devilish quiver. She did not cry out, not then, not when I bound the shaft against 2 trimmed slats to keep it from moving. Her mouth went a little white around the edges. "You've done this before," she said. "I've done most things once," I answered. "A few of them I regret in every weather." I glanced at the hearth. The stew's skin had gathered and broken and gathered again. A living clock. Outside, the wind flung sand at the walls and asked to be let in. We listened. What a pair we were, me, with a head full of yesterdays and a back that remembered each mile. Her, with a future tied to a black shaft and the joke of men who called theft a ledger. Far off, I felt the hooves first with my boot sole before I heard them. The land will tell you what the air delays. 6, maybe 7, horses going light to save their wind. Laughter came next, dragged thin by the storm, but still uglier than any thunder. "Is there a back way?" I asked. She keen-edged a breath. "Trap. Door. Under the board by the far wall. But it's not where they think." She turned her head a finger's width, and the feathers moved like a clock's second hand. "Listen to me, Elias Cade," she said, and the syllables were the steel in a woman who'd choose her own dying if forced. "If they take me, they'll make you watch to teach a kind of lesson. You must not watch. You must either run or finish it." "They won't take you," I said, "and I don't run." Both statements were prayers dressed up as plans. I checked the Colt, the Winchester, the spare rounds in the belt loops. 12 here, 6 more in the pocket, a skinning knife that had not seen sin in a decade. I put the table on its side and wedged it under the front window. I kicked the fallen chair to the corner for later trouble. I slid the stew pot from the fire to cool. I don't know why that mattered, maybe because a thing abandoned half done offends me. "Callow!" a voice bawled from the dark, using its master's name like a banner. The door shivered in its frame. Rain found us through the chinks, a scatter of cold coins. "I count 2 horses," the baller went on, "but only 1 saddle warm." "Show me your hands," another voice said low, tight. That would be Callow, a man who never needed to shout to cut. "Then show me the deed." I put my mouth close to Ayana's ear. "If they come fast, I empty the Colt at the door," I whispered. "If they come slow, I talk." She swallowed once. I heard it loud as a shot. "Talk first," she said. "He likes words when he thinks the knife is already in." The door banged open a hand's width. The night breathed whiskey and wet leather into the room. A paint-horse silhouette filled the gap behind a man I knew without meeting. He wore the kind of hat men buy when they start believing they are the law. The brim dripped a clean line of rainwater. He had a sawed off, laid idle across his shoulder like a shepherd's staff. His eyes found the arrow before they found me, and I saw the little pleasure there, the way some men smile when they step on a beetle. "Well now," he said, "looks like somebody pinned their own moral lesson to the wall." The men outside laughed on command. "You must be the neighbor." "Name's Cade," I said. "Elias. This woman's dying, Callow. You pull that iron wrong and she'll do it quick. You pull it right and maybe she talks." 1. He stepped inside, slow, and the rain forgot him, sheeted away to either side like it had been told a story. "Talks about what?" he asked. "About where the real paper is," I said, letting the words fall lazy, as if we had a week. "A debt that holds up in a court, if you can find one sober out here. A signature that ain't forged. A cellar that ain't where fools would dig. You want that. You don't take pleasure first." Islash. Something mean crossed his face, and then left like a stray dog shooed from a porch. "You're bold," he said, and it sounded almost like praise. "Bold men die interesting." He flicked his eyes to the arrowhead gleaming dull near Ayana's breast. "You fix that and she speaks. You fail and we light this box and watch her smoke." I could hear how close his men stood by the window, smell the horse, and tobacco feel the storm pressing its ear to the walls to eavesdrop. I knelt behind Ayana. My left hand settled at the arrow's quills to steady. My right closed on the shaft. "This will be a kind of hell," I told her, low enough that only she could keep the words. "When it comes, ride it. Don't fight. Do it clean," she breathed. Her hand slid along the dirt until it found mine for a second, bone to bone, then let go. Something small pressed into my palm without weight. A key, copper worn round as a river stone. She didn't look at me. She didn't nod. She simply held my gaze long enough for a word that had no voice to pass between us. "Cistern." I drew a breath like a debt, and paid it all at once. You don't pull such a thing. Men who've never done it speak of pulling because the mind loves a straight line. You drive it forward on the track it carved, steady and without mercy. Or you tear the living fibers in new directions and learn what screaming is meant to be for. I set my jaw and put the strength a man saves for lifting his dead into one smooth push. The arrow slid. The room went smaller than a coffin and bigger than a church. Her breath tore the shape of my name and then broke. The iron head kissed the pine floor with a wet thud that will outlive me. Ayanna folded forward, freed of the nail, and I broke the shaft hard against the table edge, so the feathers flew like black snow. The door jumped as somebody outside startled at the scream that hadn't fully happened. Callow's eyes widened, then narrowed to blade thin. "What in?" he started. I was already moving, the broken shaft a spike in my fist. The first man through the window met it under his chin and made that surprised, damp sound men make when they learn that throats are soft. His pistol fired wild into the ceiling and shook down a sift of dust that fell like winter. I rolled off the table's far side, and the Colt found my hand as if it had been waiting there all its life. "Now," I said to the storm, or the Lord, or to the part of myself I keep locked in the oldest room. The room answered with thunder, and I answered with lead. The bay outside shrilled and set back. Men swore and scrambled, and the night came into the door in pieces. Through it all, I could still hear her breath ragged. Yes, but hers and the small slide of the key in her fist, as if it were the only clean sound left in Arizona. Somewhere in that first 10 heartbeats, I understood what had changed. Not the direction of the wound, though that mattered, but the direction of my life. I had walked this country for years like a man come late to an empty station, reading schedules long out of date, waiting for a train that no longer ran. And now, with rain in the door and blood on the floorboards, a woman with an arrow scar and a word for water had handed me a ticket with my name on it. "Cistern," I mouthed, and hoped to God the key still had a lock. Callow's first man went down with the spike still quivering in his throat, and the room pinwheeled into noise, the slashed snarl of wind, the buck of gunfire, the hard-footed scramble of men who'd come expecting a harvest and found a fight. I fired twice into the doorway before his shadow flattened against the jamb. Somebody outside yelped and stumbled into the mud. A second shadow shoved through, and I caught his pistol arm with my left, turning his shot into the ceiling where it puffed soot like a black breath from the shack's ribs. I hit him with the table's edge, and he folded into the stew pot, sending a gray-brown tide across the floor that steamed where it met fresh blood. "Ayanna," I said, and my mouth barely moved. "Floorboard now." I saw her jaw set the way a far ridge hardens when the sun goes behind it. With the arrow gone, her knees shook under new pain, the kind that arrives after a delayed bill. She slid tight along the wall, fingers searching the seam I'd only been told about. A round clipped the doorframe and spat splinters into the room. I shot the man at the left window by reflex. His hat leapt, and he went backwards into the wet. Callow's voice came level through the storm, almost gentle. "You've killed 2, old man," he said. 3 if you count Murphy choking in the soup. Are you set on 4, 5, 6? The numbers don't care. I brought more than you can spend. I've seen men bring numbers to a flood, I answered, loud enough to carry. It drowns all the same. He chuckled. The sound had gravel in it. "Listen to the preacher," he told his men. "You boys hear that? The old one thinks water favors the righteous." A pause, boots shifting. "Bring the lamp." That. I caught the ghost of orange in the rain just beyond the sill. If they set fire to the door and roof, the shack would turn to a kiln and we'd be the clay. I grabbed the downed man's collar and yanked him upright like a shutter. "Lean," I told his dead weight, and he did because he couldn't choose otherwise. 2 quick rounds thudded into him from outside, and the body twitched against my hands as if he'd reconsidered an argument with himself. I let him drop. Ayana's fingernails found the loose board. The soft click might have been God nodding. She lifted once, twice, panting, then got it up on the 3rd try. Cold air rose from the dark like a shrug. "Elias," she said. "Feet first," I answered. "Hold the key." Callow must have seen the shape of our plan in the stagger of her shoulders. The door hitched open enough for a barrel to nose through matte black, cut short, hungry. "Now," I said, and I didn't know to whom. I flung the stew pot's lid at the doorway. The shotgun blasted the lid into a wheeling, screaming scrap that hammered the opposite wall. I took the blow of air in the face like a slap from a giant and dropped to one knee, shooting at where a man's hip ought to be when he leans to look what he just destroyed. I was right. He went down swearing in a voice like wet bark. "Go," I told her. She lowered herself into the hole and vanished to the waist. For a second her palm surfaced, the little copper coin of the key shining wet. I closed my fingers over it and pressed it back. "You keep it," I said. "If I fall, find the lock." "I won't leave you," she said. There wasn't any theater in it, no bravado. Just fact, hammered thin by pain. "You will if you must," I said. "That's what living means." She slipped into the dark and was gone. I dragged the board half over the gap and kicked the rug on top with the heel of my boot. I put my back to the window and counted the thunder's spacing. The storm steps were closer rain now, heavy enough to drum out a cadence on the roof that a green lieutenant could march to and get half his company killed. "Fire it," Callow said, weary now. "I'm not playing dance hall with one stubborn old fool." The lamp glow bobbed nearer. A silhouette bent at the eaves. The match rasped like a snake and the wind almost took it, but the man cupped the flame with his hat. He leaned to the shingles at the front corner where pitch had dripped and hardened from last summer's patch. The flame licked, found a tongue, began to speak. "Roof," I said to myself, and then louder. "You put spark to a dwelling and the law will ride your name into the gallows memory, Callow." "The law is here," he said mildly. "I brought it with me. I have papers." He paused. "Show him, Weddle. Hold it up for the gentleman." One of the men shoved a folded sheet into the lamplight. It wore a county seal and a satisfaction I'd seen on greedy faces since the Rio Grande. I wasn't close enough to read the script, but I could feel the lie like a heat. The paper said Ayana owed what she did not owe, and that forever was due now. "Let me," said another voice, deeper. Boots scraped. The roof, gutter, flame, drew breath and began to creep. The shack answered with a dry sigh, the way an old man does when he knows he's got more to endure before he's earned his rest. "Deputy," someone shouted from the dark beyond the yard. The word cracked the night differently than thunder does a clean, official crack. "Deputy Nora Valdez, Cochise County, drop your irons and show your hands." The voice wasn't large, but the badge in it stood tall. Callow didn't startle, which told me he'd expected visitors or believed himself God's cousin. "Evening, Nora," he called, affable as a saloon owner on pay night. "You, of all people, know how paper works. Come lend it your eyes and save us spilling ink in the mud." "Step away from that house," Valdez called back. "Put the lamp down. We'll talk with the rain between us." Ayana's breath rustled up from the trap thin, tight, reminding me she was pacing a short room below where air went hungry. The smoke from the roof would find her worse than me if I didn't keep it honest. I shot the lampman's wrist. The lamp fell, burst in the mud, and drew a star out of the rain that blinked once and died. "That counts as resisting," Callow said. "I suppose we both keep score our own way." His tone shifted curt now. "Weddle, take 2 and circle the cottonwoods. If the deputy is alone, disarm and invite her to reason. If she brought a posse, we'll set our reasoning to a wider table." "You'll set it at the jail," Valdez said. "There's been a murder on the creek, and I have a cloth with the name Callow cut into it same weave as your men wear for neckcloths. Also, unless I miscount, you've fired a shotgun into an occupied house. That's arson murder if the woman inside dies." "Won't," Callow said, and drove the word like a nail. "Because our good neighbor here, Elias, is it? He's going to help her breathe by telling us where her late father's stash sits. He stepped into the doorway just far enough that I could see hat brim and rain strings shining along its curve. Come now, Cade. You push a shaft through a lady's breast and call it doctoring. You've got the stomach for reality. Use it. You talk about reality like it's a mirror, I said. But the glass always seems to show you taller. A shadow moved to my right, wrong side of the window. I fired blind and ducked. The reply cracked too high and showered me with grit from between the rafters. I tasted pitch and the bitter of upset stew and the nicked tin tang of blood that wasn't mine. The roof flame flared as if insulted, and then guttered again, the rain winning for the moment, the pitch sulking. Elias, Ayanna rasped from under the floor. The cistern, listen. The stones, left. Count 7, then down 1. She coughed, and the sound wrapped around something wet. Key fits a latch, not a lock. Stiff, since my father died. Each phrase traveled a long way to reach me. You hear that, Callow? I said. She could talk all night if your appetite for theft gets bored. Lo. Bring her up, he said, or bring up the paper that proves a debt. Either will do. I glanced toward the trap. The board lay crooked. The rug skewed the way a wind takes a hat from a drunk. If they rushed, they'd see it. If they set fire, smoke would bank low and sink to the cellar like a second drowning. I slid to the back wall and peered through the crack by the hinge, where a sliver of yard showed cottonwoods twitching in the rain, a dark smear of horses beyond, and there a flash of tin. Valdez had taken a knee behind the big stump, where lightning split the tree last spring. Her hat brim was a slice of black on black, her pistol hand steady. My belt felt light. 4 rounds in the Colt, 5 in the Winchester, and 1 in the tube. A knife, a prayer that wouldn't leave my throat because I'd used it too often in my life as a trade token instead of a true coin. I inhaled slow, felt the shack breathe with me, every plank and nail a rib and sinew, an old body that knew what it was to outlast. All right, I called to Callow, letting a little weariness show. You want the lady to breathe long enough to confess the location of your fantasy? You want the deputy satisfied no one dies here but the truth? Then step back to the porch and hold your men. I'll push the woman a little to the air and do what I can for the lung you punctured by hiring idiots. Lo. A long moment. The rain softened, as if the storm were listening too. 2 minutes, Callow said finally. If a gun rises in that time from any hole or seam, I end your arithmetic for you. His boots creaked once on the porch plank. I counted to 3 and threw myself across the floor to the trap, wrenched the board off and dropped to my elbows into the dark. The cool rose like a blessing. Ayanna's face was a pale crescent, lips darkened, eyes bright as river stone in moonlight. I slid my arm under her shoulders to lift her ribs enough that the wounded lung had a different angle to work, at a trick I'd learned in a field hospital where the flies did more punctual work than the surgeons. This buys time, I whispered. Not much. You see the stones? She nodded toward the far wall where the earth stacked up, cut square by a hand that respected corners. 7, she said. Down 1, over 2. I reached, counted, wedged my knife into the mortar that time had turned to something like chalk. The 7th stone moved with a little grating sigh. Below it, cool as a promise kept in winter, my fingers found an iron tongue set into a crossbar. Latch, I said, and the key copper, warm from her fist, waited like a bird in my palm. I pressed it into the slot that wasn't a slot at all, but a pressure plate set behind the bar. The plate yielded with a click older than me. Something heavy shifted in the wall, a stone coffin lifting its lid without complaint. Water whispered. Not much, just a thin, stubborn trickle that you could follow with your ear deeper than the room went. The panel eased inward, releasing a smell of limestone and old rain. Inside, I saw what Ayanna's father had meant for a better tomorrow. A folded ledger wrapped in oiled cloth, 2 canvas sacks that rasped like sand when you nudged them, and a bundle of tools bound neat with rawhide shovel, small pick, a folding level, a brass scope scratched with names. There was more. An Apache, made water gourd, painted with a simple spiral, a tin of seeds, a coil of wire. It wasn't just treasure. It was intention, a man's plan to make water honest in a dry county. Take the ledger, she breathed. Deputy needs proof before she'll hang a man on word alone. Her fingers brushed mine, slid to the canvas sacks. The dust is medicine for papermen, she added, a bitter grin flashing and gone. I passed the ledger up to the floor beside the trap and tucked one canvas bag into the shadow of the fallen chair. The second I kept with me. Above, the floorboards creaked. Not rain weight. Callow hadn't counted to 2 full minutes like he promised. "Time," he said, voice just above us, as calm and close as if he lay in the bed that used to be in this shack before it turned into a battlefield. "Bring her into the room, Cade, or I fetch her myself." "Coming," I said, and my voice went flat because fear had stepped into it wearing my boots. I slid my arms under Ayanna and lifted. She bit her lip once, and the breath she'd saved for later leaked out through her teeth. I got her shoulders above the floor line, set her back against the wall with the board supporting her spine so the wound didn't open a new argument. The room swam around her like heat above rails. I put the ledger in her lap and closed her hands over it. Callow took a single step inside and halted, as if he'd struck a line he couldn't see but believed in. Deputy Valdez's silhouette shifted at the stump a new angle, a readiness. 2 of Callow's men ghosted toward her from the cottonwoods, low and eager. "Here's your talk," I told him. And the words felt like they came from that other room inside me, the old one, windowless, where I've stored the better part of what I can't forget. "You're not hunting debt, you're hunting water. You want to roll pipe down this draw, sell it dear to men you've trapped on their own land by forging ink on county seals. You can build a fortune if you break this one woman and the proof she carries." He smiled the way a blade sometimes looks like a smile when it's first drawn. "You're a poet, Mr. Cade. I trade in prose. Coins, signatures, time. Bring her forward." Ayanna looked at me through the ache. "He thinks men don't drink words," she whispered. "But paper thirst kills the same as drought." I raised the Winchester a little. Callow's barrel lifted in answer. "Don't," he said softly. The 2 men near the cottonwoods lunged. Nora moved first, 2 shots clean enough to sign her name with, and one man spun into the mud, his hat flying like a dark bird startled from a nest. The other got off a wild round that rang the stump like a struck bell. Horses reared and tangled reins, and the storm chose that moment to tear itself open over the yard, flinging water so hard it felt like gravel. I snapped a shot at Callow. He had the devil's own grace, and slid aside with just enough to let the round cut his coat instead of his ribs. He fired back low, mean, and the bullet smashed the chair at Ayanna's hip into a brown cloud. She didn't flinch. There was nowhere left to flinch to. "End this," Callow barked, and 3 shapes came on at once, pushed by his will and the storms. I emptied the Winchester too fast to count, then felt the click that says a man owes the tube and can't pay. Someone hit the wall next to my ear with a slug, and the old pine spit a splinter into my cheek that was hot as cinder. I tasted blood and pitch again, and the room began to tilt the way it does in an earthquake the mind has all to itself. "Elias," Ayanna said, and her voice pulled me level. "Left, low." I dropped, punched a boot into the trap edge, and the board on that side flipped up into the shin of the man who was almost in the room. He went down with a curse, his pistol thumping the floor by my knee. I took it and gave it back to him, hammer first. He slept. Nora's 3rd shot cut the storm. Then I heard her curse short, Spanish when her gun clicked dry. Callow laughed once, because he liked music, and that sound was music to him. "Bring the rope," he said. I stepped in front of Ayanna and felt the weight of what I couldn't be enough. My Colt had 2 rounds. Callow had 5 men breathing if I hadn't miscounted. The ledger was warm under Ayanna's hand. The sacks looked like nothing in the dark. The cistern whispered about a long-ago rain making its slow way to where somebody with patience might draw it up. "I know where the pipe should run," Ayanna said suddenly, almost conversational, though a tremor ran under the words. "My father walked the slope in August. He carried a willow rod and watched what plants listened. Even drought speaks if you kneel." Callow's eyes flicked to the ledger. The hunger in them went from stone to fire. "Up," he told his closest man, and gestured at the book. "Take it." He moved the length of a breath. I moved the length of my last 2 rounds. The first took his hat brim and a piece of his ear. He screamed high and young in a way his voice hadn't done since he'd been 12. The second shattered the lampstand he'd rested his hand upon before he stepped, and the room went dark, the way a curtain falls in a cheap theater, fast, untidy, with somebody still mid-speech. "Deputy," I yelled into the black. "If you like Wild West love stories or Wild West stories, drop a bunch of 1 second and your place in the comments for the Wild West Love channel. Tell me where you're listening from, so I don't feel so alone out here." The dark held still for a heartbeat after my last shot, like the land itself was waiting to see which way justice would lean. Then came the shuffle of boots, a hissed curse, and the sharp breath of a man discovering pain wasn't as private as he'd hoped. Lightning cracked through the doorway and turned every surface in the shack white for half a second. Faces, splinters, blood, all stripped of mercy. When the flash died, I could see again. Callow had dropped behind the overturned bench, blood dark on his left sleeve. 2 of his men still stood, one aiming wild through the smoke, the other dragging the half-dead body of the one I'd clubbed back toward the door. Ayanna was pressed against the wall, her breath a thin thread through clenched teeth, both hands still clamped around the ledger. "Give me the book, girl," Callow snarled. "You can't read it anyway." Her answer was a spit of blood that hit the plank beside his boot. I felt the smile before I knew I had one. "Looks like your handwriting class failed," I said. He raised the shotgun again, but the thunder outside cracked louder, swallowing the sound of him chambering a shell. For an instant, I couldn't tell if it was weather or gunfire, but something heavy slammed into the roof. Tiles slid down in a rush. Then a voice, Deputy Valdez, called through the storm. "Elias, move, they're flanking the window." I turned in time to see a shape climbing the sill. The Colt barked once, red lightning from my hand, and the shape fell backward into the rain, taking half the shutter with it. For a moment there was quiet again, wet, fragile quiet. Smoke curled from the barrels, mixing with the smell of burned pitch and stew gone sour. Ayanna's eyes fluttered open. "You should leave me," she whispered. "I will slow you." "Lady," I said, checking the Colt 1 shell left. "I've been slow since 72. You're just giving me an excuse." "Udja." Her breath hitched between laughter and pain. "You joke like men who've already made peace with death." I tried. He wouldn't shake my hand. I tore a strip from the curtain and wrapped her shoulder tight, ignoring the way she shivered. Outside, I heard Valdez shouting commands. 2 more guns fired in answer, then the solid crack of a Winchester. Callow used the noise to crawl toward the door. I caught sight of his boot heel. 1 quick shot would end him, but mercy is a habit you either break early or die from later. I aimed low, blew out his spur instead. He screamed again, dropped his weapon, and vanished into the yard, dragging his wounded leg through the mud. I pulled Ayanna toward the trap. "We're leaving," I said, "before he circles back with fire in his teeth." She shook her head. "Not out. Down." "Down where?" "The cistern tunnels. My father built them when soldiers burned our last home. He said one day we'd need a place that remembered water better than men remember mercy." She pointed toward the loose wall. The stone door I'd opened earlier gaped like the mouth of some old god. Cold air breathed from it, carrying the mineral smell of earth that hasn't seen light in centuries. I hesitated. The rain could wash tracks, Valdez could hold them. But one look at Ayanna's gray lips told me she'd never make another gunfight. "All right," I said. "Show me the ghosts." We slipped into the hole, lowering the board behind us. The world above narrowed to a single square of dim light, and then closed altogether. Darkness folded in thick, damp, total. I struck a match. The small flame showed slick walls of sandstone, old carvings running like scars along them, spirals, sunlines, the shapes of rivers no map ever printed. The floor sloped downward into a shallow channel where water shimmered faintly. "Your father was an engineer," I said. "He was a farmer," she corrected softly. "He just refused to believe the desert couldn't be reasoned with." We followed the channel deeper until the sound of rain above became only memory. The air cooled my sweat to ice. After a few minutes, the tunnel widened into a circular chamber, half carved, half collapsed. A single shaft of light came from a crack high above, enough to glint off the surface of a low pool in the center. On the far side lay a small chest, iron-bound, stamped with Spanish letters so old the corners had worn to ghosts. Ayana knelt beside it, using both hands, though they trembled. The copper key turned in the lock with a click that echoed around the chamber like a church bell underwater. Inside lay more than gold: 2 pouches of dust, a stack of letters, and a folded treaty paper sealed with wax the color of dried blood. "My father traded for this land fair," she said. "The mine owner forged new maps after he died. That paper is truth, but truth is heavy when gold lies beside it." I brushed a thumb across the wax. "Heavy enough to bury men," I said, "but maybe not today." From far behind us came a faint metallic sound, steel against stone, regular, deliberate. I doused the match. "They followed," I whispered. Her eyes found mine in the dark, steady again. "Then we give them what they came for." We moved around the pool, keeping to shadow. When the first lantern flicker showed at the tunnel mouth, I saw Callow's profile, the torn sleeve tied with his own neckcloth, his face pale and furious. 2 more shapes behind him carried rifles. "End of the line, preacher," he said, voice echoing too big for his chest. "Drop the gun. Let's see what the dead Apaches hid from progress." I stood straight, Colt raised, its hammer half-cocked. "Progress," I said, "always looks worse up close." He smiled and fired. The bullet hit the wall inches from Ayana's head, throwing a shower of sparks. I squeezed off my last round, hit the lantern instead. It exploded, throwing burning oil across the tunnel and filling the air with choking smoke. Callow cursed, stumbled back. Ayana seized a handful of sand from the chest and flung it into the fire. The powder hissed, bright as lightning, a flash that turned the smoke into a mirror. For an instant, every man saw himself burning. I used that heartbeat to grab her hand and drag her toward a narrow side passage where the air moved cooler. Behind us, Callow screamed, "After them!" Shots rang wild, deafening in the confined space. We ran bent double, half blind, feeling our way along the rough stone until the passage spat us out into open air. The storm had spent itself. Only drizzle remained, silvering the sage. Below us lay the creek, swollen but crossable. Across it, faint torchlight, Valdez and her riders searching. "Almost there," I said. Ayana's knees gave. I caught her before she fell. "Leave me," she murmured. "Not my style." We waded into the water. It came up to my thighs, cold enough to bite. The sound of pursuit faded behind. Maybe the smoke had swallowed them. Maybe their courage had. Halfway across, I felt something shift underfoot, a hollow thud. Wood over air. "Bridge beam," I guessed. "Old one." "No," she said faintly. "Storage tunnel from the fort. My father used it to—" The rest vanished in a roar. The bank behind us collapsed, and the creek poured into the new hole like a beast finding its mouth again. The surge caught us both, spinning us under. Cold seized everything, the wound in my arm, the memory of heat, the idea of breath. I broke surface once, twice. The third time I found gravel under my boots. I dragged Ayana onto the far bank, both of us coughing water like newborns. She lay still, staring at the sky that was finally clearing. The clouds tore open to show a few stars, raw and perfect. "Still with me?" I asked. Her lips curved the smallest amount. "If this is the afterlife, it smells of mule and gunpowder. Then we're alive. The Lord keeps a strange sense of humor." She reached weakly toward her shoulder wound. The bandage had soaked through, pink under moonlight. I pressed my palm there and felt the pulse, faint but stubborn. "Elias," she whispered, "you could walk away. You have no tribe here." I shook my head. "I lost one long before tonight. Maybe it's time I joined a better one." Downstream, Valdez's lanterns glimmered closer. I fired a single shot into the air. The echoes rolled over the water like drums at a funeral that hadn't decided who was dead yet. When the deputy's silhouette appeared against the glow, I called out, "Got your witnesses, Nora, and your truth if you don't mind getting it wet." "Oh?" She splashed across, gun drawn but eyes wide when she saw Ayana. "Mother of mercy, you should both be corpses." "Too stubborn," I said. Valdez tore a strip from her coat and tightened the bandage. "You realize Callow won't stop. He's got half a company of mercs riding for him by morning. Then we don't give him morning, I said. Ayana's hand found mine, surprisingly strong. My father said, water shapes stone because it never quits. We will be water. I nodded, and for the first time in 20 years, the word we didn't sound borrowed.